All right, everyone. Hi. Thanks for being here. So awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So the talk I'm giving today is a day in the life of a web developer. I wanted to give this talk because it's an aspect of the job that I would have appreciated having earlier on. Uh, and yeah, so I hope that you'll find it useful. Feel free to ask a lot of questions. I'll pause at the end of most slides for questions. And yeah, any questions you have, I'll try and incorporate it into the next version of this. I put this together. This is the first time I've given this talk, so yeah. But yeah, so the table of contents, I'm just going to introduce myself, just give you some context about my perspective, the amount of experience that I have, so that you can use your best judgment on what to take, my opinions on. And yeah, so then I'm going to talk about what's the point of web development, with some subpoints there that I'll go further into. I'll just talk about how I begin my day, what I do during my day, and then I'll speak on the types of meetings that I have as a web developer at a startup. And yeah, so as an introduction, I'm Ember Borja, pronouns are she, they. I have 5 years of experience doing web development. Most of that has been with C#.NET backends and React on the front ends. I started in this career in 2018 when I went through a web development boot camp here in town called Awesome Inc. It's like a 3-month course where I changed careers and learned, about this job and started writing code. Back in 2012, I got a bachelor's in science in human factors engineering, which is essentially product design. There's some coverage in that course, in that major, about user interfaces, working memory, that kind of thing. So that kind of got me interested in web development. And so between 2012 and 2018, I was an officer in the Army, and now I'm doing web development. I currently work remotely for a company out of Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm fully remote, and that's going to be a perspective that I'll bring to this talk. So, I guess first off, does anyone have any questions specifically for me at the moment? No. Okay. Yeah, sure. Neil's got a quick question about talk about setting up my space for remote work. Yeah, so something that I've learned, so I've done in-office work before, and now being fully remote, something that I have to do for myself is eliminate distractions. So I have an office, portion of the house that I'm able to sequester myself in. I'm able to shut the door. I use headphones to be conscientious to the people that I live with. But yeah, I think aside from that, for remote work, yeah, it's just for me personally getting into work mode. So I try not to be in this office if I'm not working. And that it's a way for my brain to context switch quickly and efficiently. And it helps me to not be checking my phone during the day. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I have different PCs. So Tiger Pistol paid for me to have, I think, this ThinkPad laptop, which is nice because then if I want to, I can go work at a coffee shop, which sometimes I'll do just as a change of pace. I recommend using a VPN if you do that. Yeah. But yeah, and then if I'm doing personal stuff, I try and keep it on a personal laptop. Yeah, or if I do have to do something on this piece, on this, my work PC, I will back it up so that it's not just on this computer. That being said, my employer doesn't have spy software on my laptop, but Okay, so segueing now to what's the deal with web development? And so, to me, this is my personal opinion. But the point of web development is to create software that works and to ship it to an end user. So like that's the whole point of writing software, is that you're trying to make a thing that does a thing well, and then you want to get it into the hands of someone who is going to use it and needs it. So going into the specifics of that and say, well, what does it mean to make software that works? Again, this is like my personal opinion, but in my mind, I paraphrase it as like, does the code run? And then is it secure and is it performance? And so I chose those questions because those are some of the biggest issues that I've run into in my career. Most of the time, you're gonna be able to make code that can run, right? And like a thing that you want to accomplish, and so you can more or less get from point A to point B there. But what is really going to hamper you is some gotchas in terms of security, and then in terms of performance. One of my coworkers, who I respect, I asked him one time, what's the difference between a junior developer, like a mid-level developer, and a senior developer? And in his eyes, because he'd been working with big data most of his career, it's the number of users that your code that you write can handle. And that kind of played out at that company. I was working on a web application that was meant to be a portal where these clinics could view their data in this portal. So these entities on this portal represented clinics, and they had all this information tied to that clinic. And it worked well when you had like 100 clinics in there. But when we started getting over 1,000 clinics, the web app just started grinding to a halt. And so I had to get in there and figure out what was going on, and then see about how we could improve the performance, because that is an instance of your application slowly going from working fine to not working at all, which is scary. And then you have to try really hard, and it's a really convoluted problem to try and get it back to a state where it's working again. And the solution for that specific example was that we were not using Redux correctly, and that we were not using React very well either in terms of our component architecture. So it was a solution that I could figure out, and that we got to a place where it was working again, thankfully. It was all UI. But if your database is like pegging out at 100% CPU usage, that's going to be a harder problem. So anyways, yeah, it's easy enough for me to say those like 3 sentences of code run, secure, performant, but there's a lot, obviously, like I'm alluding to, that's baked into there. And so yeah, I wanted to break down, does your code run, into a couple different aspects. So you need to understand your problem. The whole point of a product, right, of like a startup, is that ideally you're solving a pain point, and so that can take on a lot of different forms. Maybe you're reducing friction in a process that already exists. Maybe even if you're a consulting company and you're trying to talk to a company about their processes, like the pain point there is maybe you're trying to reduce the amount of money spent either in man hours or in compute hours. But yeah, so a good understanding of the problem and then keeping that problem in mind is huge if you're going to start working on something. On a more micro scale, understanding your problem comes into play for me when I'm working on our web portal at Tiger Pistol, in terms of just like, what is this feature that I'm creating? Like, what's its purpose in the grand scheme of our greater platform? And, what is our expected usage of this new feature by our users? So that is going to be vital information that I usually get from our fantastic product team. Their whole job is to understand our product and to understand how users are using the product, so that they can inform when we write new features or when we fix bugs, that kind of thing. So yeah. And then, Tiger Pistol writ large, the pain point that we address as a company, the reason that we exist, is we allow large companies to create Facebook, well, Meta, so Instagram and Facebook, and now TikTok advertisements at scale, and that they're also localized. So that's a capability that doesn't exist in Facebook's native UI. If you're going through Facebook's website and you're clicking around, you're not going to be able to do the kind of thing that we are offering because we work with Facebook to use their backend API in order to achieve the things that we're trying to do. And so Facebook wins because they're getting more advertising on their platform, and they don't have to invest in this capability natively. And yeah, so it's a win-win for everyone involved. But yeah, so then that being said, right, then as a web developer, your goal is then to write the solution to the problem. So yeah, part of what goes into that understanding is, you have to understand the problem to understand the solution, but then you also have to understand the context in which your code is going to run. And so for us, that means it's running on the internet, which has some security implications there. Anyone can technically get to certain parts of your website. If a user of our platform at Tiger Pistol, right? It's like, yeah, they're paying to use the platform, but past that, you can't assume that they're not a malicious actor. So you have to do things like sanitizing your inputs, just like the basic industry best practices for security that have been hard learned. But yeah, and then does the tool fit the job? So for most people, like most people, if you have like a startup idea, a lot of the bog standard stuff that you're getting from like a web framework is going to do what you want it to do. It's going to include certain safety features and like that are going to cover your use cases. And so that's really excellent. That makes doing this job really easy. It's really nice. As long as you are doing your due diligence of like keeping your frameworks up to date. So, that's the reason why people go with like C#, like with .NET, is because it's a framework that's well supported by Microsoft. It's not going away anytime soon. It's constantly getting security updates, and there's new versions pretty regularly. All we have to do is worry about upgrading to the newest version, and then that also comes with the added benefit of we get new tools to play with. Maybe a bug is fixed in a new version, some weirdness in the framework. Yeah. So also, as a quick example for does the tool fit the job, there was an example of a company that I used to work at. We had a backend service that was meant to take that clinic portal that I was talking about. It was going to take requests from it and be like this middle layer between that and some of our other backend services. When it was written, we chose to use this protocol for communicating with it, for sending requests. It's called Remote Procedure Call, RPC, and we used gRPC specifically. And so, as communicated to me, it was, we ran into an issue there because like RPC was meant to have like this, we were using a technology that was really good for keeping a request open for a long duration, and it was just doing like bilateral communication. So it's like we could communicate with the server could communicate back. And in actuality, what we wanted was to best fit our the problem that we're trying to solve was actually we wanted to just fire off like these events, and we didn't care about receiving feedback from it. Like if it failed or if it didn't, we didn't care. We just wanted to like fire off these packets, and then it would have an effect. And so we were using the wrong tool for the job, basically. we were trying to use one technology in like the way that it was not ideal for. So yeah. So I'll finish off this slide and then I'll open it up for questions. I've been talking at you for a while. So yeah, I guess there's some secondary considerations. So this is the things that I run into most days, right? Is I'm asking myself, like, is our code maintainable? And so for us, that's constantly the packages that we use on our front ends. So, if we use some sort of npm package for like tooltips to handle like all the tooltips that we have in the app, well, it's like, whenever we do an npm install, if one of those needs to be updated, then it's going and seeing, hey, what's in this new version? Do we need to update it? What's it going to take for us to do that? If we determine that, yeah, that's something that we need to do, then I'll make a work ticket for it. So yeah. And then also at Tiger Pistol, we write tests. So if I'm writing a new feature, I am expected, and as part of our code review process, is that I show that I've written tests for this new piece of user interface, like this new feature. And so, the point there is that if someone were to tweak this feature later on, like we wanted to add some new functionality to it or something like that, then these tests will help you catch bugs before they go into production. Yeah, so the other aspects of this is readability. So this comes into how you're writing your code, how you're structuring your code. Also, though, like how you're structuring your files. That kind of goes into it. I like to keep my React components to specific files. And then, so we have this convention in our code base because Tiger Pistol's been around for like 10 years. So if anything, even if you disagree with like specifically how it's being done, if you're leaning on the conventions that are already set at your company, it's going to help. You just get used to how your company does stuff. Recently, my Tiger Pistol, we want to go in a different direction with an aspect of our backend. And so that is specifically something that we've talked about so that we can, in the back of our minds, instead of defaulting to how we've been doing stuff for a certain aspect of the code base, we now know that if we're doing a ticket that is going to touch that section of code, that we want to actually make a concerted effort to do it in a different way going forward. And so it's a way to do that incrementally. But yeah. And then just stay on top of industry conventions. I guess so, that's a loaded phrase too, but the way that I try to stay on top of industry conventions is by watching like YouTubers who are kind of like industry influencers. Like there's this guy, Matt Pocock, I want to say, who is constantly producing content about TypeScript, about like aspects of that programming language, and like ways to write things that are like more readable or more robust or help you with in terms of like IntelliSense in your editor, so that you have type safety, and it reduces friction in the when you're writing code. And when you reduce friction or you make things easy for people, then it means that people are going to do that thing. So yeah. And then documentation. So something that I've learned, I guess in my experience writing code, is that your code is saying what it's doing. So I never write a comment explaining like what's going on. I try to, like when I'm creating new methods or variables in my naming, I try to be very specific so that the code itself is like very explicit on like what's happening. But then we want to make documentation in the code about like maybe why a decision was made. So that when you come back later, you can be like, well, why did we do it that way? And I was like, oh, well, these were the realities at the time. And so, when you're reading that, if you're touching it later on, you're like, oh, well, that reality has changed. So actually, we could do this. So I don't know. And then, yeah, version control is massive. I worked at a company that did not do version control. Uh, and I got to tell you, it's that sucks. I don't recommend that. If you go work for a company that doesn't use Git or some sort of version control, I would be highly suspect of staying there for very long. But yeah, I don't know. All right, well, that was a lot of info. Sorry. Should have broken this up into more slides. Does anyone have any questions? So Neil has a question, says he kind of touched on this, but coming from the perspective of a junior, how do you bring code improvements up with someone who is more experienced than you, especially if there's a big issue? Um, yeah, I think that as long as you are specific in your observation, yeah, I think it's just communicate directly, you know. Um, Someone who's more experienced might have questions for you, in which case you'll be like, well, I don't actually know. You go do some information discovery, circle back with them. But yeah, I don't know. I think that for me, whenever I'm whenever I'm talking to other engineers, I try to be very specific in my language. Um, and also I try to be specific in my requests. So I kind of rubber duck in that way. So I write it out and I just reread it, make sure that what I'm saying makes sense to, to someone that's not in my head. Um, and then, yeah, just maybe try to identify certain assumptions that you have, and maybe in terms of your question. Uh, and so validating assumptions is going to be big, anticipating questions, but yeah, just communicating clearly. And then, yeah, I think that you'll both come to a greater understanding of what you're asking about. And then maybe they'll be like, oh, yeah, that is an issue. And then you probably generate a ticket off of that. Which, that's been my experience. That's how we do stuff at Tiger Pistol. So we just try and document anything that we're going to do into a work ticket so that we can then allocate hours against it and prioritize it against other work. I'll get into what that looks like when I get into the portions of talking about meetings. But yeah. Does anyone else have a question for me with regards to creating software that works, I guess? All right. Okay, so I guess I'll move on. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Yeah, so once you've made software that you're pretty confident works, right? Something that I had to learn early on as a developer, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and um, getting the fine art of like knowing when to ship code is important. So there's this proverb, I think it's like a French, comes from France, but it's like perfect can be the enemy of good, which is to say that if perfect is even a metric that you can achieve, if it takes you 4 weeks to push out perfect code when you could have pushed out good code in a week, it's preferable that you push out good code in a week. There's just like several factors in that, right? But because you're kind of fighting in your head about your conception of perfect, and you're constantly just trying to, I don't know, for me, it was just like, oh, well, how can this break or whatever? As you do this more often, you'll gain a better understanding of that. And so for me, would spin my wheels a lot with anxiety about the code that I was writing. Like, oh, well, are the more senior members of the team going to think I'm dumb because like this code isn't perfect or whatever? Is this going to break in some way? And then are people going to blame me for that? But if you work at a company that has a culture that's like that, I wouldn't stay. Tiger Pistol is not like that. Like, we do not make each other feel dumb. Like if something breaks, it's just like, oh yeah, that's gonna happen. We're very much like the move fast and break things mentality. And then, when you do that, you have to understand that like things are going to break. So don't get mad at people. Um, yeah. I guess another thing in terms of performance is I was working, last company I was working at, we had this C++ like client application that ran on the servers down at these different clinics. And there was a memory leak in there. Someone was like creating an object and then like transferring, like using a pointer, but they never like deallocated that object. And so there was a small memory leak that over like the course of a month meant that you had to restart the server, which is not ideal. That was a pain point for us. And so someone had to go in and figure out like what was going on. So that took a senior dev like a solid week's worth of effort to find that memory leak and to fix it so that we don't have to restart these servers every month. And then at the end of that, he was like so mad and he was like cursing up and down and he was cursing the dude who wrote it originally. And I was like, oh wow, okay. I guess you don't like that guy, or I guess the message that was sending to me as someone who less experienced than him is that, oh well, you better hope you never write code that has an issue with it, or else someone's going to be real mad at you. But then when I went to go talk to the developer who wrote that server, that I was talking to him, he's like, oh yeah, that was like when I first started working there. It's a startup. They're asking me these like crazy expectations, and so I only had like 2 weeks to write that. So considering what I produced in those 2 weeks, I thought it was pretty good. And so I don't know, that was like really eye-opening to me, that like yeah, it's like he did we the that what he wrote ran for like 3+ years. And then finally we prioritized finding that memory leak so that we didn't have to restart it every month. And so it's just like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, he was just mad because he was staring at C++ code for a week, but the other guy, yeah. And so, and then, the dude who wrote that has learned so much in his last 3 years. And the only way that you could have, I don't know. So, and then now you have experience of how to identify. It's like if your service is failing randomly every month, maybe it's a memory leak, So I don't know. You move fast, break things, you learn stuff quickly. So, anyways, part of when I'm writing code, if I want to make sure that things don't break, writing those tests. If I make a change and test is failing, that's immediate feedback. That's fantastic. We have a quality assurance team, so I'm able to let them, like this, their whole job is anticipating bugs. They're trying to break your code. It's fantastic. So some due diligence there is that you should be running your code locally to make sure, like following the happy path to make sure that it works. The happy path is like doing exactly what you anticipate a user to do. So it's like, and then the QA, when you hand it off to QA, knowing that it works as intended, it's following all of the acceptance criteria. You've done, at Tiger Pistol, I make a new feature, I do product acceptance. So I sit down with the product owner of this feature request. We talk through it. I go through the happy path. I show him everything that's working. And, we just make sure that we've hit all of the criteria to be expected for this to work. And then when I hand it off, I create a pull request. My coworkers look at that code, they pull it down, they go through the happy path, they make sure that it's working, and as well as reading the code for best practices. And then when they hand it off to the quality assurance team, then they try and break the code, and that's like their whole job. So yeah, we are high level of confidence that what we are throwing out into production is resilient code that's going to run and not going to break. But yeah, but even then, it's like make peace with the fact that stuff's going to fail. I guess as a real quick tangent, I don't know if y'all saw this, I guess, but back in like 2017, GitLab had an outage for like 5 hours where and it's because they had deleted their production database on accident. And so they had like their production database, and then they had like a mirror database. And this guy had both of them pulled up in some terminals. They were trying to do like a migration of data, and he, RM, like, RM-F the production database. And so they had like a they had backup data, but the connection from the backup database to restore the production database was bottlenecked at like a certain bandwidth, and that they couldn't increase that bandwidth quickly. So they're finally able to get back up and running, but like they had like 5 hours of outage. And so the developer who made that mistake of deleting the production database, they specifically put out in a statement that they're like, yes, this guy's not being fired. Like if we wanted, if he was able to do that, then the problem is on us as management for not setting up the roadblocks so that you can just willy-nilly delete the database. And so I just thought that was really great. I definitely prescribe to that philosophy. And so, yeah, it didn't hinder his career in any way, and they were great, and yeah, and then he later got promoted. So, yep. And then another thing that can like assuage any anxiety you have about shipping code is that if you're using version control, you can just go back to your previous commit, like you can just go back to a state where your code is working and then just ship that, and then you're good. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions on this? Okay. So, again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or put something in the chat, I guess. But yeah, so now I'm just going to talk about like how I start my day as a web developer. This before has just been like very conceptual. I'm just getting the nitty gritty of just like specifically what I do on the day to day, just so you can get a taste of like what to expect if you get a dev job. And so I start my day by checking my email. Something that I wanted to point out, it took me longer than I want to admit to do this, but working in Azure at both Bitworks, where I was working at before, and now at Tiger Pistol, we use Azure to like host our code and to deploy our code and whatnot. And they send like these automated messages to our developer. We have like a consolidated like developers at Tiger Pistol email that then fires it off to each individual developer. And so anytime someone would commit new code, it would fire off these build pipelines. And then when that build pipeline was fired off, and then when it was completed, I got 2 automated emails, which then meant I had to sift through that tsunami of just fluff emails that I did not care about in order to read anything that's important. But knowing that those emails follow a pattern, and the only thing that's going to change is maybe the title of the branch that's being as part of the build pipeline. So knowing that, I just finally made myself write a rule that said, hey, if I'm getting these email of a certain type, just auto delete it or archive it into a folder or whatever. And so that I found that I had trained myself to not check my work email because I was tired of looking at like a sea of stuff that I didn't care about. And so that helped out a lot. So I highly recommend that. I wanted to give that little tidbit out early for y'all. But yeah, and then I just like I hop on Slack. At previous places I've worked at, we use different technologies. At Microsoft Teams, but right now I'm using Slack. And so what I've got here on the right hand side is just some screenshots of Slack specifically. I make heavy use of scheduling your messages. a lot of people do a good job of like turning off notifications. So if someone, even if someone pings you or sends you a DM, you can set it to where it's like these are outside of office hours. Like, do not do a push notification to my phone. Like, I'll look at this in the morning. But if I need to ask something of my boss or of his boss, the VP of engineering, well, if you're VP of engineering, you make enough money and you deal with the problems of a certain type that you don't ever turn off your notifications. So if I don't want to make Ben check his phone at 11:30 because I decided after dinner that I would tinker around on something or whatever, or I thought of a question or something, um, then I definitely make good use of this. Schedule this message for tomorrow morning, or just make a draft message and then come back to it later, like what Neil was talking about, where it's just like, I have some anxiety about how do I phrase this question because it's really complicated and like I want to know the answer. And if they can't hop on Zoom and like talk through it with you, then yeah, make a draft message, come back to it 10 minutes later, reread it with a fresh set of eyes, and just make sure that what you're saying makes sense, I guess. But I definitely do that. I'll definitely write something out, come back to it later, reread it, and be like, oh yeah, that I don't know. My brain was in four different directions because this isn't even a complete sentence. Like I don't know what I was trying to say. But yeah. So for me, it's just like I just make sure there's no fires. If a user reported that like some aspect of our platform, like they can't do it, like, oh, especially if it's like something super important, like an advertising campaign isn't working in the exact way that it needs to, that's directly impacting spend at the company. So we make that a priority, and that's pretty much like drop everything that you're doing, investigate what's going on here, and then triage it. And so sometimes that means that, yeah, we need to make a fix and push it out as soon as possible. And so I just try and keep one eye on Slack while I'm doing other stuff. And also in that regard, when that happens, it's like maybe you might not get pinged specifically, right? Because it doesn't affect you specifically. So if I see that there's like unread messages, and then I've got these starred channels so that this things that I care about are up at the top, it just makes life easier on yourself. But yeah, and other than that, just communicate early, communicate often, communicate clearly. I mean, it's just kind of goes without saying, but yeah. If you have any specific questions though about like what that means, definitely hit me up. I'd love to elaborate on it. I don't want to tell you something that you might already know. I don't want to waste your time. So here's a quick peek at like when I hop on, it's like I'm checking Slack, I'm checking my email, and then I hop on to Azure and I'm just looking at the board, right? And so if I don't know, can y'all see my mouse? Getting some head nods. Okay, great. Okay, so here we've got a column that's approved from left to right. So it's got approved. And so I've got something in here that's approved. This is what I'm going to work on next. So I'm already aware of what this ticket is because we've talked about it in a grooming meeting. And so I have a vague sense of what it is. It's got some story points on it, which just means that's the level of complexity. 3 points, 3-pointer is probably going to take roughly 2 days for me to complete. And so then we've got priority. So priority 3 is just normal priority. A P2 is usually something that's affecting spend. So that's something that we will drop everything and try and fix. And then a P1 is, the production database was deleted. Everyone's on a Zoom call until it's resolved, or else you might not have a job next week, kind of thing. So but yeah, we've got a blocked column, so it's like you want to keep an eye on the board because like someone's got something unblocked, it means that they're kind of sending up a signal flare. That means that they cannot proceed at all. So usually we go through this board in our daily stand-ups when we all get together on a Zoom call and we do our stand-up meeting. and we talk through what everyone's working on and if you have any blockers. So, for me, it's like, okay, active work. This is what I'm currently working on. If someone is touching, like they've got a ticket that's kind of touching a piece of the code base that's, in the same area as what I'm currently touching, then we'll try and talk to each other and deconflict. Then we've got like what's in PR, so it's pull request. That means that this is work that still needs to be code reviewed. And so we can see, if something's sitting in that column, then we're going to want to put pressure on each other and be like, hey, like you need to find a good stopping point and finish this code review. This has been here for a couple of days. Ready for testing and testing columns are primarily used by the quality assurance team. So once a pull request has gotten 2 developers to review it, we'll pull it over to ready for testing. And then if the quality assurance team finds any issues with your ticket while they're testing it, they'll make new tickets, which are of a type of issue. And so, and that's a way for us to track our work and show when it's completed. And that also, it allows the quality assurance team to focus their testing if they've already found an issue. So yeah, and then when they're finished testing, everything looks good. They'll document that on the ticket with some screenshots, and they're like, yeah, I tested this, this, and this. Everything looks good. It's following the criteria for the ticket. They'll shove it over into resolved. And so, this is some code that I now need to merge into our main branch and then deploy our main branch to the production servers. And I do all of that through Azure. Yeah. Did anyone have any questions about this before I move on? What kind of things might happen to make a ticket blocked? Yeah, so let's see. Something that might make a ticket blocked is I'll shove something into blocked if I need to get a hold of someone from like the product team, but the product owner is out on vacation. And so I'll usually double that up with like a message. But if the product team, like if no one's gotten back to me yet, but maybe the VP of engineering sees that I've got that and blocked, and I'll click on the ticket, I'll see my comments. And then most of the time, like he also knows the product well enough to where he can answer the question. Yeah, so it's kind of like that. We'll also put work into blocked if we're blocked on like Facebook's end. Like maybe their API is not working in the way that their documentation specified, or for whatever reason, it's just like, well, we should be able to do this thing, but we can't. So like, aside from us trying like literally every single permutation possible so if we're waiting on response from Facebook to help us figure something out, we'll shove it into blocked just so that we know every day when we get together for our stand-up, it's like, hey, have you heard anything from Facebook? Most of the time, it's just like, yeah, I haven't checked. Hold on, let me go check. And then it's like, oh, actually, they did reply. Yeah, I'll put that back into active, and then I'll start working on it right now or something like that. Just as a couple of examples. Yeah, so at Tiger Pistol, pretty much everywhere I've worked, we've used Scrum, which is just like this like system of like practices, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a Scrum master or whatever. But I think that like with Agile development and then with Scrum, it's like Agile development is breaking up your project into like bite-sized chunks, into chunks of discrete code that can operate on their own. And then I think Scrum comes into play when it's just like, how do you achieve Agile development? And so for us, we do sprints. We usually do 2-week sprints. Lately, we've started doing 1-week sprints, which means that every week we have a sprint planning meeting where we talk about tickets that have been made. The product team is like, creating a priority list of work that they want to get done. Maybe we have certain contractual deadlines. There's like, we need to be able to, by the end of the month, like we've decided as a business, we support TikTok now. And so we've done the groundwork and we've got some like developer accounts with TikTok. Now the team has a deadline at the end of the month. We want to be able to run campaigns on TikTok through our platform. And so, we'll break those up into smaller tasks, and then we're reviewing those every single week. So it's like, hey, what tasks are up on the docket? We're talking about it, and then we're assigning story points, the level of complexity that we anticipate this is going to take, which roughly maps into the amount of time it's going to take. And then we say, okay, well, we don't want to go over like 10 story points in a week. A lot of the time, you probably don't want to go over like 5 or 8 story points in a week, to be honest. And so, at the end of that sprint planning meeting, you're taking a look at your work. You're like, okay, I've got a 3-pointer and a 5-pointer. These are the 2 tickets I need to get done this week. And so you're aware. You give the verbal clearance, and you're like, yep, I agree to do that this week. So. We have a daily meeting where we're talking, like I said, we're walking the board. We're just talking about like what's blocking us and whatnot. A pet peeve of mine is like, don't talk about like your dog in the stand-up meeting. I want to be like done and done. Like let's start this thing and be done in 15 minutes. Like I'm telling you what I'm working on. I'm telling you if I got blockers. Like I don't want to tell you that I went to the bar last night. Like you don't care. You don't need to know. Okay, and then we'll do a sprint review at the end of the sprint. So just talking about like, hey, did we accomplish the goals that we set for the sprints? Were there any blockers? Like, if we didn't get all the work done, then we try to interrogate why we didn't get it done. Is there something that we can do differently? Like, what as a team do we need to do to enable ourselves to achieve the goals that we're setting for ourselves? And then spent retrospective. So the difference between like a review and a retro is, so at Tiger Pistol, we use review and retrospective kind of analogously, but then we have a different name, and which we call like a post-mortem. So if something really, like if stuff really hit the fan, we'll do like a post-mortem to say like, hey, what caused this? And I wonder if that is maybe a review is the normal thing that we usually do. Maybe a retro is like a more serious what went wrong. I don't know. But we've got a product team. So there'll be the product owners on certain tickets. The lead developer is the Scrum Master. He just makes sure that we're all on task. And so our metric is just velocity. So we're just trying to ship code quickly. So that means that like I cannot let my anxiety turn a 3-point ticket into a full week's worth of effort, because I'm like trying to research like design patterns, and I want to actually implement the builder pattern on this now and totally break convention. It's different than how we do it in the rest of the code base, but it's like aesthetically appealing to me, and it's just like, oh, this is the elite strategy. And it's like, no, just ship code, so yeah. So I just want to touch, I only got like 7 more minutes, so I'm gonna try and make this quick. I apologize, I'm long-winded. So my workflow process, the only thing I really wanted to hit on here is this link is for tips and tricks. Like I highly recommend, if you're using VS Code or if you're using Visual Studio, to take some time and dig into customizing your editor for yourself to make like your job easier. Use a theme that you like. Use something that's easy on your eyes. I also, instead of like typing and then just trying to find my mouse and mousing around, when I'm coding, try to use hotkeys as much as possible. So this is a screenshot of me doing like Control P, which opens up the palette. I can type a file name, I press enter, and it's open. And so I immediately go to that file. It's open in my editor. It's focused. I can do Control G. I can go to the line that I care about. I can do Control Shift F and globally search my entire code base for the name of variable. If I am on a method definition, I can, or if I'm in a React component and there's this method that's being called, I can hit F12. It immediately takes me to the declaration if it's in the file. If not, it's going to take me to like the import statement for that. And then if I hit it again, it should take me to the file. If it doesn't, if it gets like hung up in like a TypeScript like type file or something, and then it's like, maybe there's some tweaking that I can do in terms of like my configuration file for my editor, but yeah. So there's ways, there's like little tricks to make your life easier and to make like your time more efficient. So instead of, and so when you do Control P and you pull up the file name, that saves you from having to open up your the file tree. You're like scrolling around, you're like collapsing and uncollapsing files because you're trying to find like the exact file you're looking for. But if you already know that like I need to get to the campaign editor, and I just Control P and it's like editor.js, and it shows me that it's in like this long tree, and then it's like you just hop straight to it, and it prevents you from having to scroll around. The other thing that I do to make my life easier is I use this, it's called a Git client. It's like a visualization tool. It's called Fork. There's other versions of this kind of thing available. So yeah, and then I think VS Code, VS Code now has some of this as native inside the editor. Before that existed, I was just using this. I've just kept using this. But yeah, it's just like a way for you to keep track of stuff instead of having to use it all through the Git command line. If I want to hop onto a new branch, instead of recalling the exact Git command I need to run, I just double click on main to get back into main or whatever. Or I drag main over to my working branch, and I'll like rebase my current branch on top of main before I push it up to do a pull request or something. So yeah, it just makes my life easier, and it's fewer things, less mental overhead. This is Azure DevOps. This is like the UI that I use when we're doing code reviews. So something that if you've not done a code review yet, this is something that you can look forward to, I guess. So in the overview tab, we have a template internally to Tiger Pistol where we answer certain basic questions. It's like, well, what does this code do? And so you just give like a sentence or two. Is there any additional context provided? And it's like, yeah, we're doing this because Facebook changed their documentation, and so it's like we're upgrading to version 17 of the Facebook API. So then you put your links to the documentation to Facebook's APIs, like in that section. And then here you're able to file by file view what changes were made. So additions are going to be in green, deletions are going to be in red. And so this just gives you a sense for like how you can click through and read the changes that were made. And then ultimately it's like, if I'm code reviewing someone else's work, then I'll go to their specific branch, I'll pull it down, I'll run it locally and try and go through the happy path. And then finally, final slide, what to expect from meetings. I kind of already talked about it, like what those different meetings were. But, when you're working remotely, it's just do your due diligence. If you're going to be, we've got a grooming meeting. So I've bookmarked on my PC in my browser. It's like I've got a grooming meeting bookmark, and that's saved a query in Azure DevOps. It brings up all of the tickets in the backlog that have the grooming tag. I'll look through them. If my name's already assigned onto one, I'll pull it up, familiarize myself with the ask on the ticket, maybe go poke around the code base a little bit for like 20 minutes. I'll put my initial findings and a comment on the ticket. Those small things help people not to waste time. So I'm able to be asynchronous in my work. I'm able to groom a ticket and get up and go pet my cats. Or I'm able to, write up a code review. And then when I'm done with that, I go do the dishes. And then I'll come back 15 minutes later and do something else, right? So, but that just, in order for that orchestra to work, I just have to think ahead, anticipate ways that I can make my life easier, make other people's lives easier, and just do that. And you have to be, that dance requires me to not become distracted. Like I can't pull up Facebook and start doom scrolling, or else, that's bad news bears. Yeah, and so it just requires you to communicate clearly and to speak up early. Like at Tiger Pistol, we do not take anything on assumption. If I'm doing, there's a lot of time we'll be like, oh, I already know the answer to this, or this might be a stupid question, but, and then it's just like we're constantly confirming our assumptions, and we just over communicate. It's glorious, it's wonderful. We still manage to keep it efficient, and then it helps all of us to work faster and to work better. So yeah. All right, so that was all of it. I hope that was good. Anyone have any questions? Oh man, sorry, I really brought you up right on 7 o'clock.
All good, all good. A lot of good information. Hard to put it all in 1 hour. And keep in mind too, next day or so, this will be posted on Slack, just in case you want to review it, or you have a friend who just couldn't make it tonight. Yeah, but if there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and cut off the recording.
I got a question. Can I ask it?
Absolutely.
It's more about getting your first position. I'm curious if you have any advice on what skills to work on if you're trying to get your first position and you want to be a web developer or get into software development, but you have learned like full stack JavaScript, Python, but you don't really have many projects to show for it. Like, what do you think the next steps would be?
Well, I mean, yeah. So coming from the background that I have with regards to the web development bootcamp, we were making projects every week and then culminating in like a big full stack project. And, for me, when I was interviewing in 2018, that's what I leveraged, right? I was like, well, this is what I've done. And because if they're like, oh, what's a time that you had to overcome adversity or whatever, or like, what can you tell me, like what and then I'll tie it back to that big project that I did, like my capstone project. And it's just like I'm familiar with that project. I can leverage that to talk confidently about what I do know and what I don't know. So yeah, I mean, I guess based off of your question, if you're saying that like you have a good level of understanding, then to get that first position, which just means like, getting an interview and then acing the interview, I would just practice the standard like interview questions, and then past that, it's making those projects and putting them on your portfolio. If you don't have any projects, I think that would be a really good use of your time, personally.
Okay, but like, can you talk on what skills you think, like what, like JavaScript, or should I like what languages? And
Yeah,
frankly, seem best for trying to get an entry level position.
Yeah, JavaScript's a great bet. I mean, that's what the first thing I learned. So, and it worked out for me. So yeah, I mean, JavaScript, and then like React has been bread and butter for me. It's got me jobs. So, and then to get my position at Tiger Pistol, they were looking for someone who is more experienced on the front end. And so because I really dug deep into my understanding of React in order to refactor that application that I was talking about that kind of stopped working after like a certain user level. Like we have to get like 1,000 people on there. Yeah, that's what allowed me to really ace my interview with Tiger Pistol, was like demonstrating that I know React very well. So yeah, I mean, I guess no matter what you choose, I mean, like, I would say JavaScript's great choice. Just throw yourself into it. Just be able to speak, anticipate what people are going to ask. So the way to do that, there's like probably like hundreds of what's it called, like mock React interview questions on YouTube, or like these like Medium articles about how to ace your React interview or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's a good place to start. I mean, because it's worked out for me personally.
Okay.
So does that answer your question? Like, can I answer it in a different way, I guess?
Well, let me ask a different question.
Sure.
So, you got started with the front end, but when you learned your back end technologies, were they on the job, or did you have to like learn them off the job and then apply for positions?
Well, so in the full stack web dev boot camp that I went through, we learned backend technology there as well. The backend technology that I learned there was actually PHP, and then we used this web app framework called Laravel, which has a lot of stuff built in to help manage your database. And so it's got some CLI tools that you can do to like do migrations on your database and to turn like your code data models into, like, it just generates SQL code for you. So I had an understanding of SQL, which was, and then of the PHP language, which was enough to get me my first job at a shop that used PHP on the back end. So yeah, past that, it was like kind of like learning whatever weirdness was there on the job. That shop did not use Laravel. They kind of used like their own hand rolled thing. So I just had to get used to how they did stuff.
Thanks for your perspective.
Yeah. But I definitely did demonstrate that like I understood the language, and that core components of the language, and that I understood how SQL worked, and relational databases just writ large. Like, if someone asks you the question, "What is a database?" just have that, like, be able to, be able to answer the question. I guess like that's one of, like, I help do whiteboard interviews at Awesome Inc. now, because I've returned now as an instructor. And so that I do like super part-time, like I show up for an hour in the morning whenever a boot camp's going on, to do warm-ups. But I also did whiteboard interview prep, and so I would just hit them with those questions and be like, what is a database? I don't know, like, what is the internet? And so you would be surprised when put on the spot, like how much of that you're like, oh shit, I don't know, what is a database? So yeah.
Yeah, so we do have one final question in the chat, if you're okay to hang out and
Yeah.
answer it. Okay, cool. So Ophir asked, what's your approach to reviewing code that you may not be totally familiar with, the code base or functionality?
Yeah, totally. Great question. Yeah, so if I'm touching a portion of the code base that I'm not familiar with, I will a few things. Hopefully, we have updated our internal wiki with like documentation on that functionality. So when someone made like our subscriptions service, I pray to God above that they made a wiki about that when they made that service, so that I can go look at it. And if they didn't, then I'm using git blame, and I'm like, do you still work here? And I'm saying, I'm tracking them down and being like, hey man, what can you tell me about this? And so luckily, my coworker who made that service still works here. We were able to talk on Zoom for like 10 minutes. It was good stuff. I had enough of an understanding to know like the broad strokes of like how that service works. And then if I had like more specific questions, then I'm using the version control to see, okay, well, what was the modification to this file before he touched it. And I try and traverse that back to just see like how certain aspects of this have changed over time. And between those things, that's usually good enough for me to figure out what I need to do. Yeah.
Okay, well, I believe that's really all the questions we have time for. We're a bit over time, but that's the way good presentations go. And thanks everybody for showing up. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.